The moment Caroline Fletcher realized her leather coin purse was missing from her carpet bag, a cold dread washed over her despite the Arizona heat beating down on the dusty town of Prescott in the summer of 1878. She stood outside the Wells Fargo office, her hands trembling as she rifled through her belongings one more time, praying she had simply misplaced it. But deep in her heart, she knew the truth. Margaret, the woman she had traveled with from Kansas City, the woman who had seemed so kind and trustworthy during their journey, had stolen every cent Caroline owned. "Ma'am, you boarding or not?" the stagecoach driver called out, his weathered face impatient as he checked his pocket watch. "We leave in 5 minutes for Tombstone, and I cannot wait any longer." Caroline's throat tightened. The fare to Tombstone was $3, money she did not have. Everything she owned in this world was the dress on her back, the carpet bag in her hand, and the shattered dream of reaching her aunt's boarding house where a job supposedly waited. Margaret had vanished that morning, claiming she needed to purchase supplies, and Caroline had been foolish enough to leave her bag in their shared hotel room. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. "I need just a moment, please," Caroline said, her voice barely above a whisper. She fought back tears, refusing to cry in front of the small crowd gathering to board the stage. She was 22 years old, alone in a territory she did not know, with no money and no way forward. "Problem here?" a deep voice asked from behind her. Caroline turned to find a man watching her with concerned gray eyes. He was tall, perhaps in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore dusty work clothes, a worn leather vest, and a hat that had seen better days. A Colt revolver sat holstered at his hip, but his expression held nothing threatening, only genuine interest in her distress. Caroline hesitated, pride warring with desperation. "My traveling companion has stolen my fare. I have nothing." The cowboy's jaw tightened, and something flickered in his eyes that might have been anger on her behalf. "That so? You were heading to Tombstone?" "Yes, I have family there, an aunt who runs a boarding house. She's expecting me, but I have no way to reach her now." Caroline blinked rapidly, determined not to break down in front of this stranger. "1 minute," the driver shouted. The cowboy reached into his vest pocket and pulled out several coins, counting them quickly before approaching the driver. "2 fares to Tombstone, Bill." "Wait," Caroline protested, hurrying after him. "Sir, I cannot accept charity from a stranger. I do not even know your name." He handed the money to the driver, then turned to face her fully. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the strong line of his jaw, and the kindness in his expression. "Name's Daniel Garrett. I work cattle ranches around the territory. And it is not charity, miss. Nobody deserves to be stranded because of a thief. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better." "Caroline Fletcher," she managed, extending her hand. His handshake was firm but gentle, his palm calloused from hard work. "I will repay you, Mr. Garrett, every cent." "Let's just get you to Tombstone first," Daniel said, gesturing toward the stagecoach. "Worry about the rest later." As Caroline climbed into the coach, she noticed Daniel's horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, being tied to the back alongside 2 other horses. He settled onto the bench across from her, his long legs taking up considerable space in the cramped interior. 2 other passengers joined them, an older merchant and his wife. And then the driver cracked his whip, and they lurched forward into the desert landscape. The journey would take most of the day, traveling south through rough territory where Apache raids were not uncommon, and road agents sometimes preyed on travelers. Caroline tried to focus on the passing scenery, the endless expanse of sage and mesquite, the distant mountains purple against the horizon. But she kept thinking about Daniel's kindness. Men did not simply help strange women without wanting something in return, her mother had always warned. Yet when she glanced at him, he seemed content to watch the landscape, occasionally tipping his hat lower against the glare. "What takes you to Tombstone, Mr. Garrett?" she asked after an hour of silence, unable to bear her own troubled thoughts any longer. He shifted his attention to her, and she noticed how his eyes caught the light filtering through the leather window shades. "Work, mostly." Here they need ranch hands at some of the spreads outside town. Silver mining has everyone focused on getting rich quick, but cattle still need tending. You move around often? Fair amount, Daniel admitted. Lost my folks when I was 16 to cholera. Been working ranches ever since, going where the work is. Not much keeping me in one place. There was no self-pity in his voice. Just simple fact, but Caroline's heart ached for the loneliness those words implied. I am sorry about your parents, she said softly. Long time ago now? He paused, then asked, What about you? What brings you all the way from Kansas to Arizona territory? Caroline folded her hands in her lap, choosing her words carefully. My father passed last winter. My mother died when I was young. I'd been working at a dress shop, but the owner sold the business. My Aunt Sarah wrote that she could use help at her boarding house. The Tombstone was a growing town with opportunities. It seemed like a chance to start fresh. That took courage, making a journey like that alone. I thought I was not alone, Caroline said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Margaret seemed so kind when we met at the station in Kansas City. She was traveling west to meet her sister, or so she claimed. We shared rooms, shared meals. I trusted her completely. Daniel's expression hardened. Some people make a living off trust, prey on folks trying to do right. It is not your fault, Miss Fletcher. The way he said it, with such conviction, made something tight in Caroline's chest loosen slightly. She had been berating herself since discovering the theft, wondering how she could have been so stupid, so naive. But Daniel did not look at her like she was foolish. He looked at her like she was simply someone who had been wronged. The stagecoach hit a particularly rough patch of road, jostling all the passengers. Caroline gripped the edge of the seat to steady herself. The merchant's wife made a small sound of distress, and her husband patted her hand reassuringly. Daniel braced himself easily, clearly accustomed to rough travel. How much farther? Caroline asked, noting the sun's position. Few more hours yet, Daniel replied. We will stop at a way station soon for the horses. You can stretch your legs, get some water. True to his word, within the hour they pulled into a dusty way station, little more than a crude adobe building with a corral out back. Caroline climbed down gratefully, her legs stiff from sitting. The heat hit her like a physical force, and she pulled her bonnet forward to shield her face. Daniel appeared beside her, offering a canteen. Drink slow, he advised. Heat out here can sneak up on you if you're not used to it. Caroline took small sips of the warm water, watching as Daniel checked on his horse, running a practiced hand down the animal's legs, speaking softly. There was something comforting about his competence, the way he moved with purpose and care. She found herself wondering about his life, what it must be like to drift from place to place with no real home. Beautiful horse, she commented when he returned. That's Copper, Daniel said with obvious affection. Had him 3 years now. Best cow pony I have ever worked with. Smart, steady, does not spook easy. You care about him very much. Horse like that? He is more than an animal. He is a partner. Saved my life once when we got caught in a flash flood. Kept his head when I was panicking. Daniel smiled slightly, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and approachable. Before Caroline could respond, the driver called them back to the coach. They climbed aboard again, and the afternoon stretched on, the landscape growing rockier as they continued south. Daniel told her about some of the places he had worked, describing vast ranches in Texas, the hard work of roundups, the satisfaction of breaking a horse without breaking its spirit. Caroline found herself relaxing, sharing stories of her own life in Kansas, the dress shop where she had worked, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with her hands. You are good with the needle, then? Daniel asked. Very good, Caroline said without false modesty. I can alter anything, create dresses from patterns or from imagination. It was the only thing that made me feel truly useful. Tombstone is bound to need a good seamstress, Daniel observed. Mining camp full of men. But there are families too. Women wanting nice things. You could start your own business, maybe. The idea had not occurred to Caroline, and she felt a flutter of hope. I would need capital for that. Fabrics, supplies, a place to work? Start small. Working from your aunt's place, maybe? Build up from there. Daniel spoke as if it were simple, as if setbacks like having all your money stolen were merely temporary obstacles. His confidence was infectious, and Caroline found herself actually believing it might be possible. They talked through the afternoon, conversation flowing easily now, discussing everything from books they had read to the political situation with the Apache tribes to Daniel's opinion on the best way to train a horse. Caroline could not remember the last time she had felt so comfortable talking with someone, especially a man. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when the stagecoach suddenly lurched to a halt. The driver's voice rang out, sharp with tension. "Stand and deliver!" Caroline's heart jumped into her throat. Through the window she could see two men on horseback, bandanas covering their faces, guns drawn, road agents. Daniel's hand moved toward his revolver, but he stopped, meeting her frightened eyes. "Stay calm," he murmured. "Let me handle this." The coach door jerked open, and one of the masked men gestured with his pistol. "Everybody out, nice and slow. Keep your hands where I can see them." They climbed down into the dusty road. The merchant's wife was crying softly, and Caroline felt her own hands shaking. The second road agent was going through the luggage strapped to the top of the coach, tossing bags down carelessly. The first man approached them with a burlap sack. "Valuables, money, jewelry, hand it over." His voice was rough, probably disguised. The merchant dropped coins and a pocket watch into the sack. His wife removed her wedding ring with trembling fingers. When the road agent reached Caroline, she spread her empty hands. "I have nothing. My money was already stolen." The man laughed harshly. "Just your luck then, lady." He moved to Daniel. "You? Hand over that gun, real careful like. Then your money." Daniel slowly removed his revolver, placing it in the sack. Then he pulled out his remaining coins, the money he would have needed to live on until he found work. Caroline watched with growing horror as he dropped them in. Because of her, Daniel had paid her fare. Now he was losing what little he had left. "That is a nice horse you got there," the first road agent said, nodding toward Copper. "Think I will take him too." "That horse is not going anywhere," Daniel said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. The road agent raised his gun, pointing it directly at Daniel's chest. "You want to die over a horse, cowboy?" Time seemed to slow. Caroline saw Daniel's jaw clench, saw the terrible choice in his eyes. Before she could think, before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped forward, putting herself between Daniel and the gun. "Please," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her terror. "He lost his money helping me. The horse is all he has. Take my bag, take the dress inside. It was my mother's. Real silk from back east. Worth more than any horse, please." The road agent hesitated, and Caroline pressed her advantage. "Real Chinese silk, hand-embroidered. You could sell it for $50 easily, maybe more. Please, just leave us the horse." "Caroline, no," Daniel said behind her, his voice rough with emotion. The second road agent had climbed down from the stagecoach, holding Caroline's carpetbag. He opened it and pulled out the dress, a beautiful blue gown that had been Caroline's most precious possession. The last tangible piece of her mother she owned. "She is right, this is quality," the second man said. "Worth taking." The first road agent lowered his gun slightly, studying Caroline with cold eyes. "Brave or stupid, lady, I cannot tell which, but you got a deal." He grabbed the dress, stuffing it into his saddlebag. "Rest of you back in the coach. Driver, get moving, and do not look back." They scrambled back into the stagecoach, and the driver whipped the horses into immediate motion. Caroline collapsed onto the bench, her entire body shaking now that the danger had passed. Daniel sat beside her this time, his face pale beneath his tan. "You should not have done that," he said hoarsely. "He could have shot you. Probably would have if you had not had something valuable to offer." "You helped me when I had nothing," Caroline replied, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "How could I do any less for you?" Daniel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she did not. His hand covered hers, warm and solid and real. "That dress meant something to you." "Yes, but it was just a thing. You risked your safety for mine back there. The dress seemed a small price." Caroline looked at their joined hands, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. Something had shifted between them in those terrifying moments, something profound and unspoken. The merchant cleared his throat uncomfortably. "That was very brave, young lady." "Very brave indeed." His wife nodded enthusiastically, tears still on her cheeks. "You saved us all, I think. That one, he had a mean look about him. No telling what he might have done." Caroline barely heard them. She was acutely aware of Daniel beside her, his hand still holding hers, his presence solid and comforting. The fear was draining away, leaving behind an odd clarity. This man, this stranger who had paid her way without knowing her, who had been willing to fight for his horse even at risk to himself, felt more real and honest than anyone she had known in Kansas. "I am sorry you lost your money," she whispered. "Do not be. I will find work. There's always work for someone willing to do it." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "But losing you, that would have been something I could not replace." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Caroline's breath caught, and she looked up to find Daniel watching her with an intensity that made her heart race for entirely different reasons than fear. The rest of the journey passed in a blur of heightened awareness. They did not talk much, but they did not need to. Daniel kept hold of her hand, and Caroline let him, drawing strength and comfort from the connection. The merchant and his wife dozed, the rocking of the coach finally lulling them into exhausted sleep. "What will you do when we reach Tombstone?" Daniel asked quietly as the light began to fade. "Find my aunt, I suppose. Hope she still has a position for me." Caroline paused, then added, "What about you?" "Find work on one of the ranches. San Pedro Valley has several big spreads. Should be able to sign on somewhere." He fell silent, then said, "I would like to call on you, Miss Fletcher, if that would be acceptable." Caroline felt warmth spread through her chest. "I would like that very much, Mr. Garrett, though I feel perhaps we are past such formalities. You may call me Caroline." "Daniel," he offered with that small smile that made him look younger and more carefree. "Daniel," she repeated, liking the way his name felt in her mouth. They arrived in Tombstone as dusk settled over the silver mining camp, transforming it into a place of shadows and lamplight. The town was bigger than Caroline had expected, with substantial buildings lining the main streets, the sounds of pianos and voices drifting from numerous saloons. The stagecoach pulled up to the Wells Fargo office, and passengers began disembarking, collecting their remaining luggage. Daniel helped Caroline down, his hand steady on her waist. "Do you know where your aunt's place is?" "Fremont Street," the letter said, "the Rosewood boarding house." "I will walk you there," Daniel said, untying Copper from the back of the coach. He shouldered his saddlebags and took Caroline's carpetbag in his other hand, leading his horse with practiced ease. They walked through the busy streets, Caroline staying close to Daniel's side. Miners and cowboys crowded the wooden sidewalks, and she was grateful for his presence. Tombstone had a raw energy to it, a sense of possibility mixed with danger. They found the Rosewood boarding house without much trouble, a 2-story structure painted white with a neat porch and flower boxes in the windows. An older woman with steel gray hair answered Caroline's knock, her face lighting up with recognition. "Caroline, oh my dear, you are finally here!" Aunt Sarah pulled her into a fierce embrace. "I was starting to worry. The stage was due hours ago." "We had some delays," Caroline said, feeling suddenly exhausted now that she had reached safety. "Aunt Sarah, this is Daniel Garrett. He helped me when I ran into some trouble." Sarah's sharp eyes assessed Daniel in an instant, but whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she smiled warmly. "Then we owe you a debt, Mr. Garrett. Please come in. You both look like you could use a meal and some rest." "I do not want to impose," Daniel began, but Sarah waved him off. "Nonsense. Any friend of Caroline's is welcome here. Besides, you look like you have been through an ordeal, too." She ushered them inside, and the boarding house proved to be clean and comfortable, with a parlor full of mismatched but homey furniture and the smell of something savory coming from the kitchen. Over dinner, which Sarah insisted Daniel share, Caroline told her aunt about Margaret's theft and Daniel's kindness, though she downplayed the incident with the road agents, not wanting to worry the older woman. Sarah listened with increasing indignation, particularly at the news of the stolen money. "That wretched woman," Sarah fumed. "To think of the trust you placed in her. Well, you are here now, dear, and you have a home for as long as you need it. The room I mentioned is yours, and yes, I could certainly use help running this place. Between the cooking and cleaning and managing the boarders, I am run ragged." "I will earn my keep, I promise," Caroline said earnestly, "and I am skilled with sewing. Perhaps I could take in mending and alterations to bring in extra money." "An excellent idea," Sarah approved. "Sarah eats," she turned to Daniel. "And what are your plans, Mr. Garrett?" "Looking for ranch work, ma'am. Figure to ride out tomorrow and check the spreads in the valley." Sarah tapped her fingers on the table thoughtfully. "I may be able to help with that. One of my boarders is the foreman at the McAllister Ranch, about 10 miles north of town. They run several thousand head of cattle. I could introduce you, put in a good word." "That would be most appreciated," Daniel said gratefully. "It is the least I can do," Sarah replied. She looked between Daniel and Caroline with knowing eyes, a small smile playing at her lips. "Now it is late, and you both must be exhausted. Mr. Garrett, I have a room available if you need it. First night is free, given what you have done for my niece." Daniel glanced at Caroline, and she saw the same reluctance to part that she felt. But propriety had to be maintained, and they had only known each other for a day, no matter how intense that day had been. "Thank you, ma'am, I accept," Daniel said. Sarah showed them to their respective rooms, and Caroline found herself in a small but cheerful space with a real bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. She changed into her nightgown, washed as best she could with the water in the pitcher, and climbed into bed. But sleep was elusive. She kept thinking about Daniel, about the way he had looked at her, the way his hand had felt holding hers. She had never believed in love at first sight, had always thought such notions were foolish romanticism. Yet something had happened today, something she could not easily dismiss. The next morning, Caroline woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of activity downstairs. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 remaining dresses, brushed out her hair, and pinned it up, then made her way down to find the kitchen bustling with activity. Sarah was cooking breakfast for the boarders, and Caroline immediately jumped in to help, setting the table and pouring coffee. Daniel appeared looking freshly shaved, his hair damp from washing. Their eyes met across the dining room, and Caroline felt that flutter in her chest again. He smiled and she smiled back, a moment of private communication in the busy morning. After breakfast, Sarah introduced Daniel to her boarder, Jack Crawford, the ranch foreman. Crawford was a weathered man in his 50s, with a shrewd gaze and a firm handshake. He questioned Daniel about his experience, nodding approvingly at the answers. "We could use a good hand," Crawford said finally. "Roundup is coming soon, and we are short-staffed. Pay is $30 a month plus meals and a bunk. If you can ride out with me now, I will get you situated." "I accept, sir. Thank you." Daniel turned to Caroline, who had been hovering nearby, ostensibly clearing dishes. "Miss Fletcher, might I have a word before I go?" They stepped out onto the porch, away from listening ears. The morning air was already warming, promising another hot day. Daniel held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "I meant what I said last night," he began, "about calling on you. I know we just met, and you have every reason to be cautious after what happened with that woman, but I would very much like to see you again." "I would like that too," Caroline said softly. "Very much." Relief flooded Daniel's face. "I will be working at the ranch, but I get Sunday off. Could I come see you then?" "Yes, please do." Caroline hesitated, then reached out and touched his arm. "Be careful out there, Daniel." "I will." He covered her hand with his briefly, then stepped back, settling his hat on his head. "Until Sunday, then, Caroline." She watched him mount Copper and ride off with Crawford, not going inside until they had disappeared from view. Sarah appeared beside her, sliding an arm around her waist. "That is a good man," Sarah said quietly. "I have been running this boarding house for 15 years, Caroline. I know how to read people. He is honest, hard-working, and the way he looks at you, well, that is special." "It is too soon to think such things," Caroline protested weakly. "The heart does not care about timing, dear. Your uncle and I knew we were meant for each other 3 days after we met. We had 42 wonderful years together before he passed." Sarah squeezed her gently. "Just do not let fear keep you from something real." The days until Sunday seemed to crawl by. Caroline threw herself into helping Sarah, learning the routines of the boarding house, cooking and cleaning and managing the various boarders who came and went. She also spread word that she was available for sewing work, and within 2 days had her first customers, miners who needed pants patched and shirts mended. The work was simple but satisfying, and she carefully saved every cent she earned. She thought about Daniel constantly, wondered how he was doing at the ranch, whether he thought of her as often as she thought of him. The way her heart leapt at every knock on the door, hoping it might be him even though she knew he was 10 miles away, told her everything she needed to know about her feelings. Sunday finally arrived, bright and clear. Caroline woke early, taking extra care with her appearance. She wore her best remaining dress, a simple green cotton that brought out her eyes, and arranged her hair in a style that took far more effort than her usual bun. Sarah teased her gently but helped, lending Caroline a cameo brooch that had been her mother's. Daniel arrived mid-morning, riding Copper and looking nervous. He had cleaned up, wearing what were clearly his best clothes, and Caroline thought he looked incredibly handsome. Sarah invited him in for coffee, grilling him about the ranch work, while Caroline tried not to laugh at his polite but slightly overwhelmed responses. "Why do we not take a walk?" Caroline suggested, taking pity on him. "I've not seen much of the town yet." "Excellent idea," Sarah agreed. "Stay on the main streets, be back by supper time." They strolled through Tombstone, Daniel pointing out various landmarks. He bought her a lemonade at a small cafe, and they sat at an outside table watching the Sunday crowds. Families dressed in their church best mixed with miners and cowboys taking their day of rest. It felt wonderfully normal, as if they were a real courting couple rather than two people who had known each other barely a week. "How is the ranch work?" Caroline asked. "Good. Hard, but good. Crawford is a fair boss, knows his business. The other hands are decent men mostly." Daniel paused. "It is not permanent, though. The roundup work will last through fall, but after that, hard to say if they will keep me on through winter." "What would you do then?" "Find other work, I suppose. Maybe drift south. Find a ranch in New Mexico that needs winter help." He said it matter-of-factly, but Caroline heard the uncertainty beneath, the weariness of a life spent always moving, never settling. "Do you ever want to stop drifting?" she asked quietly. "Have a place that is truly yours?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring at his lemonade. "Used to dream about that. Having my own spread, small maybe, but mine. Place to put down roots, build something lasting." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Lately, I've been thinking about it more." The intensity in his gaze made Caroline's pulse quicken. She knew what he was really saying, what question lay unspoken between them. It was too soon, far too soon. Yet everything in her wanted to encourage him, to tell him she felt the same pull toward permanence, toward building something together. "Tell me about your dream ranch," she said instead, keeping her tone light. Daniel's face relaxed, and he began describing it. The vision clearly one he had nurtured for years. A small valley with good water, grass for cattle, a house with a wide porch and a view of the mountains, room for horses, maybe some chickens, a garden. As he talked, Caroline found herself seeing it too, imagining what it would be like to build such a place, to have a real home. They spent hours walking and talking, and when Daniel finally walked her back to the boarding house as the sun began to set, Caroline did not want the day to end. At the porch, Daniel took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I had a wonderful time today," he said. So did I. "Could I see you again next Sunday?" "I will be here," Caroline promised. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that sent shivers up her arm. Then he was gone, mounting Copper and riding into the gathering dusk. Caroline went inside feeling like she was floating, and Sarah's knowing smile told her everything showed on her face. The pattern repeated over the following weeks. Daniel would ride in every Sunday, and they would spend the day together, exploring Tombstone and the surrounding area, talking endlessly, learning each other. Caroline's sewing business grew, and she began to build a small nest of savings. Daniel proved himself at the ranch, earning Crawford's trust and a reputation as a reliable hand. But more importantly, they fell deeper in love. There was no other word for it. Caroline found herself living for Sundays, counting the days between Daniel's visits. When he was near, everything felt right in a way nothing else ever had. And from the way he looked at her, the way he sought out any excuse to touch her hand or stand close, she knew he felt the same. It was late September when Daniel arrived one Sunday, looking troubled. They walked to their usual spot, a quiet area at the edge of town where they could sit and talk privately. Daniel was uncharacteristically quiet, and Caroline finally took his hand, forcing him to look at her. "What is wrong?" Daniel sighed heavily. "Crawford told me yesterday that they are cutting staff after the roundup ends in 2 weeks, keeping on the permanent hands, but the rest of us they are letting go." Caroline's heart sank. "So you will have to leave." "Not much choice. I've been asking around, but winter work is scarce around here. Most ranches are cutting back, not hiring." He squeezed her hand tightly. "I do not want to go, Caroline. These past weeks with you, they have been the happiest I have known, but I cannot stay without work, cannot support myself." "There must be something," Caroline insisted, "some job in town maybe." "I have been looking. Nothing that pays enough to live on." Daniel pulled her closer, his voice rough with emotion. "I am falling in love with you, Caroline. I think I started falling that first day on the stagecoach. Leaving you is going to tear me apart, but I do not see another choice." Tears spilled down Caroline's cheeks. "I love you too. I have for weeks now. I just did not want to say it, did not want to presume." She gripped his shirt, desperate. "There has to be a way." Daniel cupped her face in his hands, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "If there were any way at all, I would take it. I want to stay, want to build that dream ranch, but with you in it. Want to marry you, spend my life making you happy. But I cannot ask that when I have nothing to offer, no prospects." "You have yourself," Caroline said fiercely. "That is enough." "Not when it means you living hand to mouth, never knowing where the next meal comes from. You deserve better." Daniel leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "You deserve someone who can provide for you properly." They sat there holding each other, both crying now. The future they had been silently building together crumbling before it had truly begun. Eventually they walked back to the boarding house in heavy silence. At the porch, Daniel kissed her, a desperate, heartbreaking kiss that tasted of salt and goodbye. Then he rode away and Caroline ran inside, collapsing in Sarah's arms. Over the next few days, Caroline moved through her tasks mechanically, the joy drained from everything. Sarah watched her with concerned eyes but said nothing, letting her grieve. It was 3 days before the older woman finally sat Caroline down at the kitchen table after the boarders had finished supper. "Enough moping," Sarah said firmly. "If you love him and he loves you, you fight for it. You do not just give up." "What can I do?" Caroline asked miserably. "He needs work, and there is none." "Maybe not ranch work, but there are other kinds of work." Sarah pulled out a ledger, flipping it open to show neat columns of numbers. "I have been thinking about this. The boarding house does well enough, but I'm getting older, Caroline. It is getting harder to manage everything alone. I have been considering taking on a partner, someone to help run the business, and eventually take it over when I am gone." Caroline stared at her aunt. "You mean me?" I mean you and Daniel, if you marry. This place could support a family, not riches, but a steady income, a roof over your heads, room to grow. Sarah's expression softened. I have seen you two together, dear. That kind of love does not come along often. Your uncle and I built a good life together, and it started with this boarding house. You could do the same. Hope flared in Caroline's chest, terrifying and wonderful. But Daniel, he is a cowboy. He works with horses and cattle. Would he even want to run a boarding house? Why do you not ask him? Sarah suggested. Ride out to the ranch tomorrow. Talk to him. At least give him the choice. Caroline barely slept that night, alternating between hope and fear. What if Daniel said no? What if he hated the idea of being tied down to a boarding house, saw it as a prison rather than an opportunity? But by morning she knew she had to try. She borrowed a gentle mare from the livery, getting directions to the McAllister Ranch from Sarah. The ride out took nearly 2 hours, following a well-worn trail through beautiful country. The ranch itself was impressive, with extensive corrals and outbuildings. Caroline asked for Daniel, and a ranch hand directed her to the far pasture where he was working with some horses. She rode up slowly, and Daniel turned at the sound of hoofbeats. His eyes widened in shock, and he quickly handed the horse he had been working with to another cowboy before jogging over. Caroline, what are you doing here? Is something wrong? He helped her dismount, his hands lingering on her waist. Nothing is wrong. I needed to see you, to talk to you. Now that she was here, Caroline felt her courage wavering. Can we go somewhere private? Daniel led her to a shaded area near a stream, away from the other hands. They sat on a fallen log, and Caroline took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. Sarah offered us something, she began. A partnership in the boarding house, if we were to marry. It would be steady work, Daniel, enough to support us both. A real home, not drifting. I know it is not ranching, not what you are used to, but it could be good. Daniel was very still, processing her words. She is offering this to both of us? Yes. And I know it is sudden. We have only known each other a few months, and maybe I am being foolish, but I love you, Daniel. I want a life with you, and this could be our chance. Caroline twisted her hands in her lap, not daring to look at him. But if you do not want it, if you need the open range and the cowboy life, I will understand. Look at me, Daniel said softly. When Caroline did, she found his eyes bright with emotion. Do you really think I care what kind of work I do as long as I get to wake up next to you every morning? I have been drifting my whole adult life, Caroline, never finding a place that felt like home. But these past weeks with you, I have felt more at home than I ever have. The boarding house, ranching, it does not matter. You are what matters. Is that a yes? Caroline whispered, afraid to believe. That is a yes to the partnership, yes to marrying you, yes to building a life together. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. I love you so much it terrifies me. I will do whatever it takes to make you happy. Caroline laughed and cried at the same time, joy flooding through her. So we are really doing this? Getting married? If you will have me, Daniel said, pulling back to look at her. I know I do not have much to offer right now. No ring or fancy proposal. I do not need fancy. I just need you. Caroline cupped his face, memorizing every detail. Yes, Daniel Garrett, I will absolutely marry you. He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and hope and love. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. Daniel let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses, then picked Caroline up and spun her around, making her laugh. They talked for hours, planning their future. Daniel would finish out his time at the ranch, giving proper notice to Crawford. They would marry as soon as possible, a simple ceremony at the boarding house. Together they would learn the business from Sarah, bringing their own ideas and energy to the place. We will have to expand your sewing business too, Daniel said. Maybe set up a proper shop area in the front parlor. Between the boarding house income and your seamstress work, we could do well. And maybe eventually save enough to buy that land you dream about. You might, Caroline added. Not right away, but someday. A place just outside town where we could have a few horses, a garden. Someday, Daniel agreed, kissing her temple. One step at a time. When Caroline finally rode back to town late that afternoon, she felt like she was flying. Sarah took one look at her glowing face and smiled knowingly. I take it he said yes. He said yes. Caroline hugged her aunt tightly. Thank you, Aunt Sarah. Thank you for giving us this chance. You are giving me a chance too, dear, a chance to see this place continue, to watch you build the kind of life your mother would have wanted for you. Sarah's eyes were suspiciously shiny. Now, we have a wedding to plan. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Daniel gave his notice at the ranch, and Crawford, though sorry to lose him, understood and wished him well. Caroline sewed herself a new dress for the wedding, a beautiful cream-colored gown that made her feel like a bride despite the simple ceremony. Sarah arranged for the local minister to perform the service in the boarding house parlor. On a crisp October morning in 1878, Caroline Fletcher married Daniel Garrett, surrounded by Sarah and the boarding house residents who had become like family. Daniel had managed to buy a simple gold band, and Caroline thought it was more beautiful than any diamond. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Daniel kissed her, Caroline felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The boarding house residents threw them a small celebration with music and dancing and a cake Sarah had secretly commissioned from the local bakery. Daniel danced with Caroline in the parlor, holding her close, and she felt safe and loved and home in a way she had never experienced before. That night, in the room that was now theirs, Daniel held Caroline and told her again how much he loved her, how grateful he was for the strange series of events that had brought them together. And Caroline, thinking back to that desperate moment outside the Stagecoach office when she had thought all was lost, could only marvel at how life worked. Margaret's betrayal, which had seemed like the worst thing possible, had led her straight to Daniel. The road agents who had stolen her mother's dress had forged a bond between them that might not have formed otherwise. Every hardship had been a step toward this moment. What are you thinking? Daniel asked, running his fingers through her loose hair. That I would go through it all again, every bit of it, if it meant ending up here with you. Daniel smiled and kissed her softly. Here is to new beginnings, Mrs. Garrett. To new beginnings, Caroline echoed. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Daniel proved to be a natural at running the boarding house, his friendly manner and strong work ethic winning over the residents quickly. He handled maintenance and repairs, managed the accounts with Caroline, and even helped with cooking when needed. Caroline expanded her sewing business, setting up a small shop area where she took orders for dresses and alterations. Word spread about her skill, and soon she had more work than she could handle. Sarah watched them with satisfaction, seeing the boarding house thrive under their care. She began teaching them all the intricacies of the business, preparing to gradually hand over more control. The arrangement worked beautifully, with 3 of them sharing the load. Winter came to Tombstone, and with it a contentment Caroline had never known. She and Daniel would sit together in the evenings after the boarders had retired, talking about their days, making plans for the future. Sometimes Daniel would pull out a battered harmonica and play while Caroline sewed. The homie seen everything she had secretly dreamed of but never dared hope for. It was spring when Caroline discovered she was expecting a baby. She told Daniel one evening when they were alone, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through several expressions: shock, joy, fear, then pure happiness. He picked her up carefully, as if she were made of glass, and held her close. "We are having a baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Caroline asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Daniel said. He placed a hand gently on her still, flat stomach. "A baby. Our baby. Caroline, you have given me everything." Sarah was delighted with the news, immediately beginning to knit tiny clothes and plan for the nursery. The boarding house residents congratulated them warmly, and Caroline felt surrounded by love and support. As her pregnancy progressed through the hot summer months, Daniel became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and take on less physical work. Their son was born in November of 1879, a healthy baby with his father's gray eyes and a lusty cry that announced his presence to the entire boarding house. Daniel was there for the birth, holding Caroline's hand through the long hours of labor, and when the midwife placed the baby in his arms, tears streamed down his face. "He is perfect," Daniel whispered, staring at the tiny face. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Caroline's father, and he became the darling of the boarding house. The residents doted on him, and Sarah could hardly put him down, but it was Daniel who truly surprised everyone with how naturally fatherhood came to him. He would walk Thomas for hours when the baby was fussy, sing to him in a surprisingly good voice, and change diapers without complaint. "I never had a family after my parents died," Daniel told Caroline one night as he rocked a sleeping Thomas. "I forgot what it felt like to belong somewhere, to have people who were yours. Now I have you and him, and I feel like the richest man alive." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the boarding house continued to prosper. Caroline's sewing business had become so successful that she hired a local woman to help with the workload. Daniel had become indispensable to the smooth running of the establishment, and Sarah increasingly relied on him for major decisions. When Thomas was 2 years old, Sarah called them both into the parlor for a serious talk. She was 70 now, still sharp but noticeably slowing down. "I think it is time," she said without preamble. "Time to officially transfer ownership of the Rosewood to you both. I will keep my room here, of course, and help out as I am able, but this place is yours now. You have earned it." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. "Aunt Sarah, we could never repay you for everything you have given us." "You already have, dear. You have given me the joy of watching love bloom, of seeing this place thrive, of having a little one to spoil." Sarah smiled at Thomas, who was playing with wooden blocks nearby. "Besides, I have had my lawyer draw up papers that ensure the property stays in the family. When I pass, it will be wholly yours. No questions asked." The transfer was made legal that week, and Daniel and Caroline found themselves the proprietors of the Rosewood boarding house. It was daunting and exciting all at once, but they were ready. They had proven themselves capable over the past years, and the business continued to grow under their care. But something else was growing too, the money in their savings account. Between the boarding house profits and Caroline's thriving seamstress business, they were accumulating capital faster than they had ever imagined possible. Late at night, when Thomas was asleep and the house was quiet, they would take out their ledger and plan, figuring how much longer before they could afford that dream ranch. It was Daniel who found the property, a small parcel of land about 5 miles outside Tombstone, 160 acres with a creek running through it, good grass, and a view of the Dragoon Mountains that took his breath away. The price was steep but manageable if they were willing to invest most of their savings. "We could keep the boarding house," Daniel explained, spreading maps across the kitchen table, "hire a manager to run the day-to-day operations, visit regularly to oversee things, use the ranch as our home base, raise cattle, horses. Thomas would grow up with room to run, fresh air, animals." Caroline studied the maps, seeing the vision Daniel described. It was everything they had talked about on that first Sunday together, the dream made real. "Could we really do both?" "I think so. It would be hard work, but we have never been afraid of that." Daniel took her hand. "What do you think? Is it time?" Caroline thought about the frightened woman who had arrived in Tombstone 4 years ago with nothing but a carpetbag and shattered dreams. She thought about the cowboy who had paid her way without hesitation, who had ridden beside the stagecoach protecting her journey. They had built something beautiful from that desperate beginning, and now they had a chance to build even more. "Yes," she said firmly. "Let's do it." They bought the land in the spring of 1882 when Thomas was 3 years old. Daniel threw himself into building their home, working with local carpenters to construct a sturdy house with the wide porch he had always dreamed of. Caroline split her time between the boarding house, where they had indeed hired a reliable manager, and the ranch, watching their dream take shape. By fall, the house was ready, and they moved their little family to the ranch. Sarah came too, insisting she wanted to spend her remaining years in the countryside. They brought a small herd of cattle, some horses, chickens, and everything needed to start their ranching operation. Life on the ranch was hard, but deeply satisfying. Daniel proved as skilled at managing cattle as he had been at working them, and the herd grew steadily. Caroline turned one room of the house into a sewing room, continuing to take orders from Tombstone's growing population. Thomas thrived in the open space, learning to ride almost as soon as he could walk, helping his father with small chores, and filling the house with laughter. Their daughter arrived 2 years later, a beautiful girl they named Sarah after the woman who had made everything possible. The elder Sarah held her namesake with tears of joy, and Caroline thought her heart might overflow with love for her family. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. The ranch prospered, the boarding house continued to provide steady income, and their children grew healthy and strong. Thomas developed his father's way with horses, while young Sarah showed her mother's artistic talents, creating beautiful embroidery by the age of 6. Old Sarah passed peacefully in her sleep when Thomas was 10 and Sarah was 6, content in the knowledge that her family was secure and happy. They buried her in the small cemetery in Tombstone, and Caroline grieved for the woman who had given her a second chance at life. But life continued, as it always does. Thomas grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, talking about expanding the herd and improving the breeding stock. Sarah proved to have a head for business, helping her mother with the accounts and suggesting improvements to both the ranch and boarding house operations. It was Thomas's 18th birthday in 1895 when Daniel and Caroline stood on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. 16 years had passed since that desperate day when Caroline had stepped between Daniel and a road agent's gun, trading her mother's dress for his safety. 16 years of building, growing, loving, and living. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Caroline asked, leaning into Daniel's embrace. She was 43 now, with threads of silver in her hair, but Daniel looked at her like she was still the frightened young woman on the stagecoach. "All the time," Daniel admitted. "Think about how close I came to never meeting you. If I had taken a different stage, if I had not had enough money to pay your fare, if you had not been brave enough to give up that dress." He tightened his arms around her. "Sometimes I cannot believe how lucky I got." "We both got lucky," Caroline corrected. She turned in his arms to face him, seeing the gray that now threaded his dark hair, the deeper lines around his eyes. He was 50 now, still strong and vital, and she loved him more deeply than she had thought possible. "You paid my fare and rode along beside me, Daniel. You have been riding beside me ever since." "Best decision I ever made," Daniel said softly, kissing her forehead. "Best journey I ever took." From inside the house came the sounds of Thomas and Sarah arguing good-naturedly about something, and Caroline smiled. This was her life, the one she had never dared dream of during those dark days in Kansas. A loving husband, beautiful children, a successful ranch and business, and roots that went deep into the Arizona soil. The stagecoach that had brought her to Tombstone had carried her toward her destiny, though she had not known it then. And Daniel, the cowboy who had paid her way when she had nothing, had given her everything that truly mattered. Not just security or prosperity, though they had achieved both, but love, partnership, and a place to call home. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Daniel took her hand, just as he had on that first terrifying day when road agents had threatened them. But now there was no fear, only contentment, and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived together. "Happy anniversary," Daniel murmured, though their actual anniversary was months away. "Anniversary of what?" Caroline asked, smiling because she knew. "The day I met you, the day my real life began." Daniel kissed her properly then, and Caroline kissed him back, grateful beyond words for the theft that had left her stranded, for the cowboy who had paid her way, and for every moment of the journey they had taken together. Their children would carry on the ranch, she knew. Thomas, with his father's determination, and Sarah, with her mother's creativity, would blend the best of both parents into something new and strong. The boarding house in town continued to thrive under its manager, providing income and a legacy. But more than property or money, Caroline and Daniel had built something far more valuable, a family rooted in love and trust, born from an act of kindness on a dusty street in 1878. As they stood together watching the night fall over their land, Caroline thought about all the women like her who had come west seeking new lives, and all the men like Daniel who had helped them find their way. The West was harsh and unforgiving, but it was also a place where second chances bloomed like desert flowers after rain, where kindness could change everything, and where love could flourish in the most unexpected circumstances. She had boarded that stagecoach with nothing, her money stolen, and her future uncertain. Daniel had paid her way and ridden beside her, offering protection without expecting anything in return, but they had both received more than they could have imagined: partnership, passion, purpose, and a love that had only deepened with each passing year. The Rosewood Ranch, as they had named it in honor of Sarah's boarding house, stretched around them in the gathering darkness, a testament to what two people could build together when they refused to give up. And as Daniel led her inside to join their children, Caroline felt nothing but gratitude for the strange path that had brought her here, to this man, to this life. The stagecoach fare had been stolen, but a cowboy had paid her way and rode along beside. In doing so, he had given her far more than passage to Tombstone. He had given her a future worth living, a love worth cherishing, and a story worth remembering for all the years to come.